Hello everyone and welcome to Baltic Spotlight, hosted by the Joint Baltic American National Committee. We would like to thank the Riga Graduate School of Law for hosting us in their library in the Art Nouveau Center of Riga. Today we are joined by Armands Astukevičs, who is a researcher for the Center for Eastern European Policy Studies. Armands, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, great to be here.
Excellent. Recently, you were in Washington, D.C., and your organization was collaborating with the Atlantic Council on a series of events on Latvia's approach to deterrence. Corresponding with those events, you had published an article, Inside Latvia's Race Against Time to Build Deterrence Against Russia. Can you explain how the Baltics perceive the Russian security threat and explain the timeline or time sensitivity to achieve credible deterrence?
Well, it's quite a comprehensive question, which requires a comprehensive answer. And I think, from the Baltic perspective, also, the view here from Riga, I think, towards Russia has always been, the one of caution, because of all the historical experience with the Soviet occupation. So, Russia has always been conceived as a threat. Obviously, if we look more from the comparative perspective, it's very enduring, very multi-domain, starting from, these kind of social and all kinds of, what we call sharp power influences that Russia has been, conducting in the region, but also, especially since Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine, also this very clear, conventional military threat that Russia conveys. So I think, Russia has always been conceived as a threat. I'd say that currently it's also seen so by the majority of, also on a societal level. If before maybe it was more seen, from expert level, the people that work on security and defense policy as, then currently I think it's very ingrained into, the social fabric also, and the day-to-day discussions, day-to-day feelings of the general population. And I think, also there have been a lot of what we would call waking calls that, have steered this the feeling of threat. We can, go back to 2008 and the conflict in Georgia, 2014, annexation of Crimea, and I think each of these steps, and that's also what we, did have this discussion back in Washington. When we organized our conference on Latvian U.S. resilience, was that this kind of step-by-step learning of Russia, seeing this, rise of hybrid threats, seeing this rise of information domain threats, and now, a lot of focus on very conventional military threats. And so, I'd say the timeline, what we've heard, and a lot of military and intelligence analysts that have, spoken out, a lot of Western intelligence agencies saying, 3 to 5 to 10 years, what the timeline is of, when could Russia mount some kind of serious offensive against NATO. And when we think NATO, obviously we think, one of very vulnerable position that the Baltic states is in. Obviously, it raises a lot of alarm, and I think that has mobilized a lot of, both, from societal level, a lot of public demand for, to talk about defense policy, to see more, investment in defense, and see it as a very, day-to-day issue, where it previously was not. But I think overall, we have to look at these, statements with a lot of caution about, what the threat perspective is, because mainly, all these assessments are based on are the facts of how fast can Russia reconstitute its military capabilities, and it's also a very dynamic indicator. At one point, we can see that the Russia's military-industrial complex is ramping up. Currently, it has reached its peak. So, these estimates also change. But this is, one part where we think about, the capabilities of Russia. The second, which is much harder to measure, and this is also what we as researchers try to do, what is Russian intent? what is it trying to signal, and it's harder to read. So, whether, Russia would commit to, conflict in Baltic states in 5 years, it comes down to both capabilities and the political decision in the Kremlin. So I think that's something to consider, and that gives also a good perspective that it's not an inevitable threat. It's something that we can counteract. It's something that we can deter. It's something that we can build resilience against, and I think that's the good motivation, that the perspective that we should be viewing it, and that's certainly the perspective from the Baltic states, that we have to, make ourselves as strong as possible, and it's a continuation of the policy that stems from at least 2016, 17, especially after events in Crimea, and it's a continuation. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned defense spending, which in Washington has become a short form in terms of how we assess states and their seriousness in addressing security threats. Obviously, at the most recent NATO summit, there was an agreement to reach 5% of defense, or 5% of GDP towards defense spending. All three Baltic states had already previously announced that they would exceed this number for FY26. But that also begs the question, what will be the defense budget priorities for the Latvian MOD? What capabilities will be the priority going forward with this increase?
Yeah, and I think we have to, turn a bit back, to a few years ago, and I think, for Latvia and all the Baltic states, we've reached the threshold, the previous threshold of 2% for a very long time, and we can see that, the people that have been working, in defense, or I myself, did a lot, been in the Home Guard, and I've seen how the military in the defense sector has developed throughout these years. So we're not working in an empty space. There's been a lot of, and I'd say a lot of very fundamental growth in this area. But and that's also one thing that I think we are trying to convey with our event in Washington, was that yes, it's very clear we have these very quantitative, very measurable ways that we can look at defense, but there's also this qualitative dimension, where the money is spent, what kind of measures are being implemented, what are the best practices, and one of the big questions has been, also, this building of resilience, and also what the government is doing in itself. But if we look, solely at, the defense spending, I think there's a lot of what has been learned from the war in Ukraine, obviously, but there are some that are long-term priorities that have been set for a very long time, but maybe did not have the push or the the urgency that we're seeing currently, and definitely with all the war developing and the push from Washington, this decision to reach the 5%. But I'd say there are like 4 to 5 main priorities that have been set. The first, and I think it is very closely related to what we've seen in Ukraine, is the question of layered air defense. So from medium to short term, and also combining with allied military capabilities, as we've seen from Russia's military doctrine, all the civilians and civilian infrastructure is a military target. So, and it is very important, from the societal perspective, but also from clear military standpoint, that we are able to fight against these threats. At the same time, understanding that you cannot cover every square kilometer, that's not realistic, but focusing on main military infrastructure, critical infrastructure that is important to continue to conduct defense activities, to continue operations also on the civilian level. And the second one obviously is also concerning everything that concerns long-range strike capability. So I think Latvia for 2027 there is plans to deliver your first HIMARS systems. Also coming from a doctrine that we do not see the potential conflict with Russia only on our territory, but being able to strike back at Russia, to strike targets deep in Russia, that concern all the military operations, and these are not only very high, but obviously expensive and high level equipment, but also the question of drones and different kinds of capabilities that complement it. The third one, everything that's related to mobility and mechanization, modernization of our mechanized brigade. And fourth one, which is very closely related also to this change of perception, how we perceive Russian threat, is the construction of Baltic Defence Line, so the investment in infrastructure, military infrastructure on the borders, being prepared to fight, not let the enemy too far in, which is also stems from what we've seen in Ukraine, where Russia, indiscriminate killings of civilians, this destruction of cities, something that both from societal perspective and from political perspective, but also from military planning, where it intertwines, seeing that we do not want Russia to be able to advance deep into Baltic territory, which also is obviously very correlated with the defense depth that the Baltic states have. If we compare the territory of Ukraine, which is quite large, to the territory of the Baltic states, for us, every centimeter, every meter, every inch is so much more important to defend.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's certainly a lot to unpack there, and I would love to follow up in terms of lessons from the war in Ukraine. And one question I had for you was the level of optimism within Baltic policy thinkers and people within the Ministry of Defense in terms of the ability to develop strong air defense, and especially for the period of time in which the Baltic states will be fighting somewhat of an asymmetrical fight until reinforcements can arrive. Is there more optimism these capabilities can be developed despite the size and stature of the Baltic states?
I think that's the ambition, and that definitely is one important step that, as I mentioned, there's a huge popular demand from it, to the political level, that this is the way that we're going forward. And I think, also a lot of changes since 2022 have occurred both in the region. So we have 2 new NATO member states of Finland and Sweden, which completely changes the regional picture, especially in the Baltic Sea, but also on the land domain. Where also this, and we have to understand that it's neither Latvia, Estonia, or Lithuania fighting the fight alone. It's Russia sees it as one operational area, and so do we. And Finland, joining NATO and substantially extending the border, this burden sharing comes into play. But I think, this is one of the certainly the political ambitions that we have to generate sufficient military capabilities to be able to stand on our own. Long enough, for Allied reinforcements to arrive, point one. But point two is also, in peacetime, both in the diplomatic domain and military planning domain, generate, the Allied forces that are here already, and increase the size of, enhanced forward presence that, consists of 13 nations. And there's a lot of, good steps and good steps that have been made in this direction since, especially already the Madrid summit, where Canada, for Latvia, committed to a brigade-sized element, and this is something, obviously considering the enemy, the threat that is Russia, which is quite large in size and war experienced because of war in Ukraine. We have to, pre-position as much as possible, and that's the second ambition. But obviously, it also these are the two pillars that it stands on. But The second is very dependent on the first. So, the commitment of allies is only possible when we're, demonstrating, and that's, what we also argue in our articles and the work that we've done, that we have to, commit and generate and demonstrate our own, sufficient military capabilities, being able to stand on our own feet. And this also very much touches upon, this resilience aspect. How resilient are our governments? How resilient are our, not only military, but other institutions, and showing also these innovative ways of, how we, develop our resilience and show, this, war-fighting capability and will, to defend. And these are, very closely related elements.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just speaking about hosting a brigade-level force requires an investment in of itself, even to develop the barracks and these like very basic things that we take for granted even before warfighting requires such a high-level investment. So I've been very impressed that even 10 years previously, just none of this infrastructure had existed. So it's been, it takes many villages, let's say, to get this done. I wanted to return to this previous concept you mentioned about defending every inch, which is something that was agreed upon among NATO allies at the Madrid summit. In terms of how it looks like regarding actualizing policy, I understand March of 2024, the Latvian cabinet ministries adopted a border fortification and counter-mobility plan, investing, I believe, 303 million over a 5-year period. What is the plan of action to secure Latvia's border? And a lot of discussions also that we hear about the Baltic Defence Line is to encourage interoperability and common defence structures. What has been your take so far on these developments, and what can we look forward to in the future regarding Baltic defence of the border?
Yeah, this has been one of, I think, pivotal decisions and very clear understanding that, there's always been, this element, whenever you do defense or military planning, of counter mobility and all kinds of, these barrier plans that are developed. But, seeing, this commitment to, defending of the first inch, it requires, a long-term perspective that cannot be built in 3 or 5 or how many days. It requires a very substantial infrastructure that must be there in place already. So, and the Baltic Defence Line, what it is, for all the Baltic states, is multi-layered, different kind of barrier and infrastructure plan to be able to channel, the perceived enemy, which is Russia, into the corridors where we want to fight, and it consists of different kinds of infrastructure, both just cement and concrete, to also mines, weapons systems also that are part of this Baltic Defence Line. But I think what is important, not only the construction of it, but that this this changes a lot of the military perspective, the operational planning, what goes into military plans, but also the training. What are our ways how we fight, and then we have to learn to fight from these positions. And I think that's also something that we must not forget, that it's not only investments in infrastructure, but how we adapt our capabilities, how we adapt our training plans, so that our forces are prepared to fight from these fortified positions. So yeah. So I think this is a very, very good ambition, and it's something that obviously now is just taking shape, taking time to take shape. But over a longer term perspective, I think it's a very good investment and a very good a very good perspective. And I think what we've also what the politicians and the policy planners have tried to convey is that this is also investment, for example, for the local development, for local businesses that also generates, and it's very important that it's not something that we're just investing in. It is just static barriers. It's something that local businesses are investing in. We have volunteer, different kinds of companies that have volunteered their help, and I know this shows this all of society effort in this perspective.
And speaking of the all society effort, that is also something you mentioned in your article. And in particular, you mentioned the Latvia's 2018 adoption of a comprehensive state defense approach, which includes integrating the private sector and civilians into national defense planning. Outside of the border space that you mentioned, how will Latvia integrate the wider society into defense thinking?
Yeah, I think we also have to take a few steps back and to explain a little how this concept came into being. And I think if we look back, and this goes back to 2014 of the situation in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea, what we saw is that war fighting is not only a military domain. It's not only military responsibility. We see it's very important that we have resilient population. We have people that are willing to fight, willing to resist, and different ways counter these hybrid influences that we've saw for a long time emerging, but that took shape also in this kind of hybrid, unconventional military means. So this, I think, was one of the reasons that created this concept. And the second one was also what NATO was doing, and in 2016 in the Warsaw Summit, adopting the baselines for resilience. So 7 baselines that also the civilian side must be prepared in terms of continuation of government, of the energy grid, transportation system, the roads, all that is all in all a civilian domain, but is very important to conducting successfully military operations. For example, as we previously discussed, this question of welcoming and reinforcing allied forces that would come into the region in case of a military threat. All this host nation support also requires infrastructure, civilian, different kind of services that must complement these. So the comprehensive defense concept was adopted in 2008, and there's a lot of dimensions that it touches upon, starting from very basic societal level, from the individual level to be prepared for 72 hours, to basic civil defense questions, to this question of how we can integrate and how civilian sectors can support this defense sphere and military operations in case of threats or war. And there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of companies that very different sectors. Starting from, as I mentioned, questions, for example, of electricity, how we can ensure that we are prepared to sustain and repair and all ways to ensure these essential services, but also how, for example, in counter mobility, how can certain companies that have resources that can create quick barriers or a different kind of capabilities that they can offer. For example, creating positions or different how they can be integrated in these defense plans. So I think that's been a very good direction, very important change also in mindset that it's not only the military that's fighting, but it's a whole of society effort, a whole of society resistance, a whole of society investment. And also what has been, most recent developments, which I think are very important. We have a well-trained and well-established home guard. That's, the numbers are changing, but around 8 to 10,000 people that are in home guard. But the new initiative that also people, for example, that maybe are not capable of being conducting military activities, but they could provide support in different means, for example, in cyber domain, or logistics or sustainment or different kinds of tasks, that they also can be and participate and not maybe meet all the necessary health requirements that is necessary for military personnel, but is sufficient. Yeah. And I think these kind of steps of involving larger portions of society that want to contribute but don't really know how, I think this is very helpful perspective.
So I guess it's so multifaceted because it's not only about providing opportunities to participate, also providing opportunities for the private sector, but also I found what you said interesting about even something such as energy security. I'm thinking of 2022. Is the society willing to even take on higher energy costs in the name of security? And I find that the Baltic states are almost unique in that sense because countries in Central Europe might not have been willing to have increased energy costs at the cost of security or for the sake of European security. So I think it's such an important aspect of how the Baltic states show resilience. Something I wanted to bring up was also the plan for the National Armed Forces Development Plan. And some numbers were cited that a goal of 61,000 troops. So I believe that's 31,000 in peacetime, 30,000 reserve. I believe the goal for that is by 2029 to have these numbers. At the current moment, what are the challenges in reaching this number? Are current rates of conscription suitable to achieve this goal? What's been your opinion on this development?
I think if we look from the perspective of Riga, I'd say we are in a less favorable position than our Baltic counterparts because for us, for a long time, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we did have mandatory service. That was after that, conscription that was canceled, in favor of more, smaller professional service that was sensible considering the threats of that time, which was more, participation in operations, counterterrorism efforts, and different. Obviously, the threat perception has changed in recent years. For Lithuania and Estonia, for Estonia that never cancelled its mandatory conscription, and for Lithuania that reintroduced it shortly after 2014. Latvia only returned to state defense service, which is this mandatory conscription only in 2023. So, it's a big challenge to catch up and build a very large force, and especially reserve force, which is, one of the main aims of such a state defense service that, over a longer period of time, you have people that a younger generation that has gone through military training, that has these basic skills, that goes through refresher courses, and you are building this larger military reserve. So I'd say it's obviously a big challenge. I think the specifics of Latvia is that we have a system that's built on many streams of potential how to generate force and military personnel. One, of course, is the professional service that consists of around 8,000 troops. Then we have the Home Guard, which is also ongoing and has been for a very, very long time, and is developing quite rapidly, but has reached around the numbers that have been quite stable for a very long time. And then we have reservist training. That is people that currently 2 times a year that every person that wants can go through reservist training and be counted in the reserve. And they're most recent, the State Defense Service. So a challenge to obviously generate this kind of manpower. And I think there are multiple challenges. There are, the structural challenges. That's, just the question of demographics, and then how many can you actually recruit in a specific time frame. But also, all kinds of, these structural challenges where you have to adapt, the military organization and everything to be able to, intake larger flows of potential trainees and state defense forces. So also, the ambition, for example, for scaling up state defense services there, but I'd say it's quite reasonable understanding the structural limitations. For example, you need to have military infrastructure that is in place, and I think there is good developments, but it just takes time to build up. But I think these are some challenges that you can smartly somehow overcome. Also, the question of instructors, people that can actually train and conduct training, and this is also a big challenge. If you have a lot of a huge intake of people, we already know that this instructor level military personnel is very overstretched with conducting training for what we have been doing in Riga, for Ukrainian armed forces, having state defense service, having a professional service and home guard, a lot of area to cover. So these are kind of challenges that make me very cautious about how fast can we actually reach these numbers, and are these numbers sufficient considering the threat that's over the border. There's Russia, that's much more a larger enemy. And I think there is place for discussion and for innovative solutions that we can do. For example, the question of infrastructure, there's certainly it's military personnel. You can find ways to host them, and maybe not a permanent military infrastructure, but kind of temporary, the different kinds of. But the question, you need people that are able to conduct this training, and I think this is area that we probably should invest more in. For example, if we look at Home Guard, they also have their instructor course that people on voluntary basis, because those are people that participate on voluntary basis. They invest their own free time, but this is an opportunity that they can do. But it takes like 90 days to go through that course, and obviously for a person that has his own professional life, going through a 90-day course is quite quite a challenge, to find, vacation time, having a personal life on the sidelines. But I think there is more that could be done to try to facilitate and support people that are ready to, invest their free time, or, different kinds of, programs where we could, try to scale up this training of instructors more faster. And I think, especially considering we're growing our budget for defense, finding for example being able to sponsor 90 days for a person to go through a course is a realistic possibility. It's nothing that's not possible. Trying to find and that's just one proposal. Just trying to find some innovative ways to increase recruitment. I think what is positive throughout all this, that at least these initiatives that we've already seen and that have taken a large strides have been, I'd say, overwhelmingly successful. If we look at reservist training, we currently, one of the reservist training courses is taking place, which is one of the largest that there's ever been. There's huge popularity and people are willing to do this, but obviously we'll hit some kind of ceiling at one point. So how we can boost this motivation. But also, if we look at the State Defense Service, it's been here only for a few years. But if we look at the results of last year, like almost half of people that went through the State Defense Service, and those were mostly, we have to consider mostly volunteers, took the decision to stay in the service, to continue their military careers. And I think that's also a very good indicator that these programs are working. That this is not only some kind of narratives that we have a well-developed and modern military that provides all kinds of these opportunities, but that also the people that are participating are seeing it, and I think that generates more momentum for especially from word to mouth. That I went through this, especially for younger generation. I went through this training. This was amazing, and there's different kinds of benefits, to it. So I think these are very, very good steps. But I think we have to be very critical of what our limits are and how we can, understanding the threat and having this threat perception, how we can, move forward with it, scale it up even faster. And that takes a lot of political will, but also, some thinking outside the box.
But I guess that's a good point you make, that these institutions are new and developing, but also even how do you get into the mind of a younger person that this is a viable career path, or this can be an aspect of your life, or not necessarily like your 5 to 9, but time you can take to develop new skills and also contribute to the state. So, we hope that those institutions continue to develop, from the government, but also in the minds of the society as well.
And that's actually a very important point. It's actually also this cultural perspective, this societal contract between the society and the state. Because I'd say, if we look just a few years back, mandatory military service was something that was, I wouldn't say impossible, but politically very hard to pull off. And this has been done, and I think, this has generated momentum. And this is the pivotal point where, if we have, I wouldn't say redefined, but, considerably enhanced, the perceptions from both sides, from the state and the society, of what are, the society, not only, rights, but also obligations towards the state and its defense. And that, this mandatory service is something that, is not something, unthinkable, but, becomes, just something very usual, the fabric of, everyday society. And I think this is something that will only develop over time. And, these institutions are very young, these structures and then these programs, but, I think over time, will be, and as we see, this is the short-term threat that we have to prepare, considering Russia, but, also playing the long game, understanding that, even after 10, 20 years, if this stays in place, and it should, that, it will generate and create a more prepared, a more secure, more resistant, resilient society.
But I think what's also interesting is that both the decision to end conscription in the mid-2000s and the decision to restart it, neither were politically controversial for its time. And I think, if we go back even 10, 15 years, the kind of security discussion we would be having would be, does Russia democratize? So our narrative has changed so much over the course 10, 15 years. And I think, fortunately, the Latvian, political will for defense has strengthened with the increased threat, thankfully. And to conclude our discussion today, I want to discuss a point more about higher politics and more broadly about the U.S.-Baltic relationship. If we were having this discussion in February, there might be more sense of nihilism about the transatlantic relationship. However, recently we've seen, I guess, two variations of the Trump administration, one in which we see the infamous Zelensky meeting in February, which we don't need to discuss the details of, and then also now where we see the Trump administration agreeing to essentially replace Patriot systems that Europe will contribute towards Ukraine. What is the Baltic perspective of the administration thus far, given the, I guess, the wide range of transatlantic expressions coming out of the administration?
That's a very good question. And obviously, it's a question that's very complicated, understanding the position that the Baltic states are in, having a lot of the time seeing U.S. as a very important, if not the most important, security partner that there is. And these, with the coming of the new administration, it did generate a lot of turbulence. Maybe not aimed specifically against or at the Baltic states themselves. I think what we've seen, and there I have a more optimistic view. All what we've seen, from the U.S. has been, if not positive, then at least neutral towards the Baltic states. So non signals that could be interpreted somehow in way that would indicate deteriorating relationship. And so, but obviously there have been signals, and I don't know. I don't think we do have to discuss it in details. That some kind of indications that this relationship between U.S. and Europe as a whole, is changing, and that Europe should be sharing a bigger burden. That's always been, if we have to be honest, always been also the perspective of the Baltic states. So I think overall, what we've seen also from our, political officials, from all kinds of planners and people that work, also experts in this field, I think, a lot of caution, understanding, the existential threat that could arise if Russia miscalculates or misinterprets the strength of the relationship between the U.S. and the Baltic states, but also if it goes into a negative dynamics. But I think the perspective was always hopeful, and I think more doubling down on the relationship. Just reaffirming that that the Baltic states have always been a reliable ally, that we have been contributors to both now in a very near future 5% of GDP, and before that 2% of GDP, that we share similar values, that we are in some ways net contributors to our security thinking, especially in niche domains. So I think this has been also the perspective of the from the Baltic states, not having the luxury to be able to move away or turn the other cheek towards Washington, but obviously understanding the risks and trying to do everything to not compromise it. So yeah, but I think what is very positive that these initial shocks, a lot of turbulences, and obviously in the early first months of the new administration, a lot of concurrent events happened, and obviously the geopolitical perspective is very turbulent. With not only Russia but also the Middle East and everything related to China. It is a turbulent world, but I think currently all the signals are very positive, and this gives a good perspective, but at the same time understanding the responsibility to, as I mentioned before, that generate sufficient military capabilities by ourselves in the Baltic states. Show this resilience, deterrence, will to fight, that we are a reliable ally, and also use this as a way to strengthen overall European defense. That also has been one of the main arguments of the U.S. administration.
Yeah, and I think the perspective from the transatlantic community in Washington has been, points of optimism. We saw Hegseth call the Baltics perfect allies in Shangri-La, and we saw Rubio reflect similar rhetoric when the Baltic foreign ministers have visited. At the same time, I think the transatlantic community is not used to rougher rhetoric to describe the relationship. So we just hope that the relationship remains strong, and that the Baltic states continue to bring the capabilities and show the value in the relationship. Well, Armands, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
It was great being here.
Excellent.
Thank you for listening to Baltic Spotlight. To stay up to date on upcoming spotlights as well as advocacy opportunities, follow us on Instagram at JBankBaltics, Twitter at JBankChatter, or email jbank@jbank.org.